Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Testing Peers podcast. We have an increasingly rare event tonight with all four of the OGs on the podcast. First, Russell.
Hello.
David.
Hello.
Chris.
Hello.
And I'm Simon. Tonight we're going to be talking about testing misconceptions, and that gives us a very wide field to discuss further. But first, just want to say Saffron QA continue to be our sponsor, and they are also here to support the testing community. Therefore, should any of our listeners be in the market for a new job in testing or hiring new talent for your team, please reach out to Ben. He can be contacted via email at ben@saffronqa.co.uk. Over to Mr. Banter. Christopher.
Well, thank you, Simon. Obviously, misconceptions can sometimes be like misusing or misappropriating opinions or understandings of things. But I wanted to sort of bring us into the physical world. And I wanted to know if you had anything that you've used that you've not used it for its intended purpose, but you found it rather useful regardless. And I'll start us off because normally I drop this listener onto the others and they haven't got a blind clue what I'm going to say. I was the other day staying in a caravan in terrifically bad weather with my family down in Cornwall, and my son had locked himself in the bathroom and I needed to find a way to help him out, get released, and I was able to use a key ring to block it in to undo the key, the lock in the bathroom to release him from there. That key ring certainly has helped me with many things, including opening packages and other such useful things in the past, none of which is actually what a keyring was intended for. Maybe somebody's got something that's actually funny, and I'm looking at you, Russell.
I was just thinking, it's a key ring. It helped you open a door. It was a key on a ring. It did exactly what it was described as.
It's in the shape of an Arsenal football kit.
It still did its description. It unlocked that door.
But it unlocked packages as well and other useful things down the line.
Getting your kid out of a bathroom wasn't useful.
It was quite useful. He was a bit upset, so I'm glad that it happened.
So I can think of one thing, which is my monitor, which I'm currently looking at. It stood upon something that is not a monitor stand. I have some exceptionally good testing books that make up my monitor stand. And books are fantastic for this, I found. I need to change them so I can actually read the books.
Yeah, especially in the pandemic, a lot of people have been very creative with how they'd be able to create a sort of home working environment, sort of putting things in more creative ways to make it more manageable.
So I remember when we used to work, Chris, at Lanterns and Gear, where we had electricity cables all over the place, and we had to protect the ends from being touched. So you got electric shocks. And I remember that I purchased some of those plastic page markers. And because they're self-adhesive, you can clip them over the live bit and be safe and remove them and reuse them. So using a page marker to stop electrocuting myself is probably the best thing I can come up with.
It's a good thing as well, because in those days, I think we used to, if you got electrocuted on those things, sometimes you could actually burn out entire motherboards. So good move, David. Well done.
I am really stumped with this one, and maybe I'm losing my touch, but I can't think of anything. The best thing I can think of is I've possibly got some branded testing stickers that I'm using to tape things to my desk and my wall around my desk rather than, and I'm not using testing peer stickers because they're for conferences. I'm using other branded testing stickers that I can't remember off the top of my head. Don't worry, I wouldn't waste our stickers on that. But that's probably the best I can think of, unfortunately.
What is that beeping going on behind you, Simon? That's the thing I'm asking you.
That is a very good question.
And how are we going to edit that out?
David, I'm not editing this episode.
There's some very creative beeping going on.
Well, we figure out what the beeping is. I did have another one which might be more exciting, which is I currently use some drain pipes as a planter.
Drain pipes as a planter?
And maybe that's a very, very live example of something that I could mention, because it's when the dishwasher's finished that it beeps. But I've been taking stuff out when the door opens. The door opens about 5 minutes before it beeps. Yes, I'm obviously not using the dishwasher properly.
The sort of creativity using things. I mean, I guess it's a lot of creativities on the show when we use things that are at hand, tools that are available at our disposal. I once tried to use some super glue to fix a tear in a bag, and lots of smoke came out of it. So it's not always the smartest of moves. Listener, be careful with these things sometimes. But I quite enjoyed that as a kind of like a little path into discussing things that maybe we should or shouldn't be using in our everyday parlance or phrases, and things that do more damage than harm in our industry sometimes, or things that are prohibitive. Perhaps you think testing is the role is purely to break things or to be the gatekeeper of quality. What sort of misconceptions do we have, or indeed did we have, that were things that we have actually been able to dispel or change in life?
So I thought when I first joined the QA world, as it was back then, certainly in my context, it was QA. I thought all we did was we took requirements, we wrote tests, we executed them, we automated them. That was it. I didn't think we did anything more. I didn't think there was anything deeper to that. I had this misconception that all we did was pretty much execute tests without really understanding what the full context of what QA testing, etc. was. That would be the last thing that I would say we do right now. It's part of the role, but it's not the whole thing that testing is.
I think you're right about that misconception, though. I think you are right that a lot of people starting out think it is just requirement, acceptance, that's it.
Yeah,
and
pretty much.
There's a lot more to testing, I think most of us would agree, than just verifying an acceptance criteria is met. I would argue you don't need other people to do that. It's already written down. So
and what became clear is a lot of that can be solved through conversation rather than having to write tests to prove something.
I think there's a large confusion as well with sort of testing methodologies, and are you V, are you waterfall, do you do it agile and stuff, and actually there isn't a one size fits all, and actually you can use different methods within the same. It can vary depending on where you are and the maturity of the project and stuff. The other thing I would say is that for me starting out, I thought that software testing is just websites and things like that. I know that's a big part. Whereas actually, having worked on embedded with devices, the options are so vast, and it's very difficult to you can't pigeonhole testing into one particular thing. So not only can you be involved in any particular part, and again going back to Simon sort of going, you do it at the end, V model, waterfall, and whatever. We can think about requirements, trying to get that shift left, trying to get us in early. And actually you can help prevent things because you can influence the requirements to make sure that they are smart, to make sure that they can be tested and verified later on.
I think one of the biggest ones for me, which I still hear around times, is our main purpose is to find defects, and that the whole purpose of what we do is about making sure the software has zero defects before it is released.
There's a couple of things in that one, though, isn't there, Simon? I think there's the whole zero defects thing. I think is one particular aspect. Is there such a thing? How do you prove the absence of defects? It's kind of like proving God one way or the other. It's pretty much impossible. It doesn't mean you can't have belief and faith, but it does mean it's very hard. You can only show what you found, not what you haven't found. And that leads me on to kind of thinking about kind of the one-upmanship over engineers and other people's, like, we're here to find flaw in others' work. Whereas everyone, I believe, would think it's much better to prevent failure than it is to find failure. Teachers don't go around and kind of looking for kids and pupils that have done mistakes. They're there to teach the pupils. They're there to kind of help prevent mistakes, but help when things do go wrong, to give the guidance, give the nurturing, to give the support, so that actually the outcome is success. And that's an important part of testing. We're not here to slap developers on the wrist, shout in joy, throw party poppers in the air, and have a celebration every time a defect is discovered. I'm disappointed. I must admit, when I started off, I was a little bit happy. But over time, I realized that was a fool's errand. And I wanted to work with people, not work against people. You're
dispelling all of those memes about testing, Russell, by saying that we want code to succeed. We're not going to celebrate finding bugs.
I know. I'm a mean hater.
What about this? What about this misconception that if you don't automate, you're not technical and you are replaceable?
Start with the first one. Just because you can't automate does not mean you're not technical. Understanding how systems are put together and all the different things about it. And I go to this one. If I go to my mother's house, for example, I'm incredibly technical. It's all context driven. it depends on the perspective of the other person, usually, whether you're technical or not. And you need to be technical enough for the thing that you're understanding. But technical doesn't mean anything without a context. I think technical is one of those ones that really frustrates me because I'm not the world's greatest automator. Can't really do much of it, done a little bit of coding here and there, but I understand how systems are put together. I understand some of the nuances of the detail. Would I call myself technical? Probably not, but I'm technical enough, I think. And then it goes to the automation side of things. Automation isn't the be all and end all. I think it's a very valuable, important aspect of agile software delivery, but it's not the be all and end all of everything. What do you guys think?
I've been hit with the I'm not very technical stick a few times, both in conversations with people. Oh, that's not very technical. You don't need to become this. It's a bit too technical for you, that sort of thing. And it's not very helpful, just generally. And I think a lot of assumptions are always made in those instances. And I think a lot of that comes down to this whole concept of the end goal is to fully automate everything. And if you can't do that, what value are you providing? But also, let's not forget, a lot of places when they speak to automation and manual testing, and I'm doing some nice air quotes around the manual testing thing, and they'll tell me that they do a bit of exploratory testing at the end. They just click around, they just check some things out, and they make sure they're happy with it. And that's kind of an understanding of those things. And we're incredibly good at having an awful lot of processes, activities, artifacts, documents that are seen as industry standard and yet wildly misunderstood or just broadly incredibly differently interpreted and implemented, not because of different context, but because everyone thinks they know the right thing and how to do it every time. And that's kind of life's ongoing frustration as a tester.
What, you mean there's no one best practice, Chris?
No.
Not one ring to rule them all?
Actually, if we're talking about misconceptions, the term best practice is quite a good one, because best practice implies this is the best way that we can achieve this goal. And therefore, that's the sort of standard by which we should be held. But best practice is often things that people take from outside of their context to try and bring within their context. And I believe that the best practices you can have are the most applicable and relevant practices. And so I would not die on the hill of, but I would suggest maybe words like good practices and useful and relevant practices provides a lot more value than best. And I worry that when people talk about best practices, because then people end up having to fit a particular workflow or process that actually creates work or hinders them from achieving their goals, because that is the agreed best practice.
I would agree with the best practice, because actually you can have new starters or new people to projects who can offer suggestions that may be a more efficient or better way of doing it, but because it's seen as best practice and maybe written down, then they might not be implemented.
Power of the word best. What does best even mean?
Yeah.
How can you have something better than best? That's just...
Yeah, and I think that's part of it. It's that age-old thing of once it's been written down once, it stays there and it never evolves. And that the best practice it might have been good practice 15 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, but today it's different. And linked to that, I think, is also the phrase of center of excellence, because that always links, that you always assume a center of excellence means best practices. And those two phrases for me kind of go hand in hand in a lot of ways.
It's assumptions again, Simon. There's so many assumptions in our place.
Actually, another thing is that some people don't like to be labeled an expert in particular areas because they don't see themselves as experts, because they can continually learn.
And that's a really good point, is that the term expert sometimes means you've reached that ceiling, that you can't get any better. And there is always room to improve. There is always room to learn more. Yeah, I would agree with that one.
I was just going to bring a new myth to us to dispel, maybe, perhaps, which is obviously that software testers are the ones responsible for quality.
Someone will have to go there.
That's...
I mean,
depends what you mean by responsible.
Oh, we're all responsible.
Yeah.
So at least we should be. But hey, have you ever noticed?
What does responsible mean in this context, though?
I was going to lead into, have you ever noticed how like people's metrics, their KPIs that they're measured by are different depending on their title? And weirdly, the quality metrics seem to only ever fall on testers, not teams. Whole team ownership. I think if a team is actually going to own quality, probably they should all be measured by that as a team. That's my warm take.
To Simon's point, what do we mean by responsibility? It is a good thing. Majority of us means kind of like you are the person, the singular point of responsible ownership, so that you are responsible for what goes well, what goes badly. And that's in part accountability as well as responsibility. And it's often
I was going to say accountability comes into that, which is obviously
combined a little bit. You're not responsible for quality because you can't put quality into a product. You can't make it good. You can highlight risks, but you can't actually fix them per se.
It comes back to that phrase of us being expected to find all the defects. So therefore, if we haven't found a defect and it goes wrong in the field, it's our neck on the block. That's where the myth comes from, or the assumption that people make when they make that statement of being responsible for quality is, if you don't find the defects, it's your head on the block.
Yeah, and there's a lot of management patterns that talk about kind of responsibility in that way. Whose head's on the block? It's not a good pattern in my view.
No, I will agree.
I've got another one.
Fire away.
We've got Jira, so we're agile.
I've got better. We use Jenkins, so we do CI/CD.
That's a really interesting one. That just because you've got a tool, you are doing a certain methodology, or whatever.
Oh, we do stand-up, so we're agile.
Yeah.
Or we have a DevOps engineer, so we do DevOps.
Oh, don't get me on that one. Please don't get me started on DevOps as a job role.
Well, and then the point of like, I'm an automation tester. I don't do anything but write code.
Lots of these.
So I've got another one. Is that because I'm an automation engineer, I can't do exploratory testing.
The other one is, what is exploratory testing? But let's not go into that. That's quite nuanced, so let's not go down there.
There was a good testing peers episode on exploratory testing, I believe. Listener,
we need to revisit it and talk more about that one. I think that's another topic to come back to when we're a bit more energized.
We've also talked about this one, I think, before, which is, can anyone be a tester? Testing mindset, that sort of thing. I believe anyone can test something. You know, we can all, but it's about the level. I can write code. I'm not sure you want me to build your application for you.
Yeah, anyone can test, but to be a great tester may well look like something.
Quality matters. And everything we do, including on the aspect of your job. There's a difference between the junior testers, the sort of starting out finding things, and the ones that have done it for 10 years. The sort of heuristics and the learnings, the patterns comes with experience. Same way that it's shortcuts in coding, learning rules of thumbs, heuristics comes into it. I can use a bot and AI to do lots of coding these days. Doesn't mean there's no role for developers. We definitely need them.
What about the one of, I have my ISTQB foundation, therefore I'm a good tester?
Oh God, I'm going to be sick. It teaches you some things, but that's like most things.
If I remember from the certifications episode, it gives you a piece of paper at the end, doesn't it?
I didn't even get a piece of paper. It was digital.
Oh, I did mine, but that was 15 years ago.
How much of it was testing your glossary versus?
Yeah. But anyway, let's not bash ISTQB because we did talk about it. You know, it might not have as much value as it could, but it does have some level of getting people in the door.
Key.
But
any framework and model can provide value when used appropriately with the right mindset. And I think a lot of what we've seen here is those things. I think sometimes us as testers find ourselves, we're kind of give our own worst enemy sometimes, because to points on previous episodes about glue work and stuff, we like to get involved in other areas. Often there is kind of like I don't want to use the word victim mindset, but I can't quite think of the right word to sort of talk about it, where there's often we assume that people perceive that we are going to be inclined towards these particular things, and we have to sort of prove ourselves from the beginning. We're not coming in as like, this is important for everybody and we can drive these things. It's quite hard to deliver with confidence. Often we're in a minority compared to other ones, and then it's like this whole them and us kind of story. And I think we sometimes feed into that narrative without even realizing it. We probably do ourselves quite a disservice by doing that, but it's quite difficult when you've kind of got entrenched all these sort of baggage and biases and things that we consume all the time on social media and in books and things that people just sort of take as gospel from various different places. It's tough, isn't it?
It is. And we dispel some of these myths I like to think over time. like getting agile. It's all about getting things involved earlier, shifting left, and things like this sort of concept, and be proven time and time again through multiple studies that getting quality built in is far more cost effective, any solution, than trying to squeeze it in at an end. And there's been a lot of science done kind of looking at that in many ways. There's different models to do it. There's not one way, one size fits all. Getting testers involved early is a good way. Making requirements better is a good way. Agile, getting in front of the customer, getting feedback rapidly, and small feedback loops, continuous delivery. There are many patterns to help, and many of them have been shown to help improve quality and resilience.
This feels like here's a take that we've had in the world. Testing is a cost, whereas development has a return on investment.
Yeah, so both costs, but yeah, one has return. I would say customers coming back is quite a good return on your investment.
That definitely is about how you lay the perspective out of what quality means. Because there's always pushes that, well, we need to reduce costs. We need to automate more. That will reduce costs. We'll be able to reduce the team size down, or be able to do this, that, and the other. But it's about how you frame quality as a return on investment. If you like you say, Russell, if you have a higher quality system, then your customers will return to use it again, usually.
Yeah, part of the broader concept of what does quality mean. It's usability, it's reliability, it's consistency, it's a pleasant experience, it's accessible. We've all got requirements under the law, the Disability Discrimination Act, and things like that, where our applications are meant to be accessible. But quite frankly, I know it's not prioritized by many.
Yeah, and I think that's a real challenge that's still very apparent in most areas of the tech world.
It's interesting because they're a percentage of your user base. I can't remember the numbers and the stats, but they're not insignificant numbers of your user base. They're not 0.1%. I think it's like 6 or 16 or something like that. I can't remember. I will go away and find out and put it in the blog.
Have a slightly controversial one, maybe to get you your thoughts. I speak regularly at conferences. I post all the time on social media. Therefore, I'm a good tester.
Well, I'm in the public domain. Therefore, I must be an expert.
Famous testers know all. Yes.
It's like all those jazz hands. Just because you're the loudest doesn't mean to say that you're, again, the best or the expert or whatever.
Absolutely.
But I've been in testing 20 years. Therefore, you've only been in 10. I must be better.
You're twice as good as me.
Must be.
Absolutely.
Oh, sorry, I've been in 16.126 years, as I've seen on some CVs.
We were talking a while ago about screening people in interview processes and looking at applications, and how people often in CVs, they'll sort of list what they did, which can be key achievements in their workplace. It's quite interesting to see what people prioritize as something that was a really good thing that they achieved in the workplace. And I often got caught in the trap of talking about an awful lot of activities that weren't related to designing tests or quality improvements and processes and things, because I ended up doing a lot of other stuff. I wonder how many jobs that ever lost me. It is interesting to gauge those things, because sometimes people try to frame it just by years experience, languages used, tools used, and that's super valuable. But I think we've spoken as hiring managers before about the value of trying to present a picture of a tester who has critical thinking and curiosity, and how that's portrayed in applications for jobs is quite an interesting thing.
Well, and like you say about key achievements doesn't always necessarily mean what you've done between your 9 to 5 hours at the office. It might be like I mentioned about the conference talks and stuff like that. But sometimes I think if you focus too much on the external stuff, it can give people the impression, well, what work do you do if you're doing all that stuff? And I think sometimes it's about getting that balance right between the critical thinking side, the successes you're having in the workplace, the changes you've led or you've driven through, depending on the leadership, whether it's a leadership role or an individual contributor. There's different aspects that you can talk about, the changes you've helped make, getting that balance right and showing that whole picture, like you say, Chris.
But also it's relevance. It's relevance to the job you're applying to. I think sometimes people or testers and CVs, we've said about testers can have very many strings to their bows, which isn't always test. And sometimes we try and make ourselves a jack of all trades. We can do this, we can do this, we can do this. And actually we lose sight of actually what we're good at, which is that critical thinking, which is that test. If we're going for that testing role, we're losing sight of this because we're clouding it with all this other fluff that we think is useful, which it is useful because actually we are capable of doing a lot more, but actually we need to write things or sell ourselves for the job we're actually going for.
And that's a really good point. And I've started saying some of this stuff to my teams about encouraging them to focus on what we need to do, because they're very quick. Some of my team are very quick to step in to be Scrum Master or be a PM for a while because someone needs to do it and no one else is going to step in. Well, hang on a minute. We need to sometimes focus on what the skills are that we need to be good at. There's no harm in learning other stuff and helping out every so often. But you're right, David, you can become a jack of all trades very quickly, and people assume that you'll jump in at every opportunity. Set a precedence.
I was just thinking, Simon, about you talked about people doing things outside of that normal ones like conference speaking and things. Just a bit of a misconception, maybe. Did you know that attending conferences is like a holiday, like a time off?
I did. Yes. Is it not meant to be?
It could depend on how many you're attending.
Or where they are.
Or where they are, yeah.
Must remember when we do PeersCon, not to do PeersCon on the beach with no talks, because I think people might get the wrong idea then.
There is a testing conference in Dominican Republic later this year.
Well, C-test, isn't it?
C-test, yeah.
Is it where you test the sea out and see the temperatures right?
That does sound very tempting. But yes, you're right. There is that misconception sometimes that you should take holiday to go to a conference. I would say most employers would have understanding that they are a learning experience and they can be seen as a learning day or a training day. But I think sometimes it's about not playing on the goodwill of your company too much and thinking, I can go to a conference every week because I need to learn. It's about, if you're attending ridiculous amounts, then it might be that you need to take some of your own time to cover some of that. But
learning is good, but we need application as well.
Absolutely that.
Also, something like I can't never get this number, but there's a rule for learning, isn't there? Like 70, 20, 10. And, most of your learning, 70% is on the job. So if you're spending 70% of your time in conferences, then something's gone wrong. It's not saying it's not possible, but something's slightly off kilt. Other misconceptions.
Have we talked about the gatekeeper?
It was in my opening spiel, but we didn't actually talk about it.
No, did we?
No.
Is that still a thing?
You're saying we're not gatekeepers?
How about that testing gate? Sometimes, you can even build it into as your DevOps, you can have so the tester can sign off, and you can't release without the tester doing it. A testing column in a Kanban. Definitions of done that say the tester has signed it off.
I think a lot of those, they might be misconceptions, but we also have to talk about context. Your favorite word, Chris. Some companies, it isn't a misconception. It is their day-to-day life. And until that mindset is changed, then it doesn't become that misconception in some respects.
True. Some teams haven't figured out the misconception yet, and it's hard.
Don't forget there's a bit of ego that can come in for a tester as well. That's about a power you've got there. That's quite nice. Quite nice, little strokey Mr. Ego. That's not a bad thing. Sometimes a bit of humility will go a long way for team success.
It can be hard because you could be, like I was once upon a time, made a test and release manager. So I was actually both for testing and managing.
I did this too.
Owning releases and deciding what could go. So guess what? There's a conflict there somewhere, isn't there? And much as I talked about it being an anti-pattern, it was still the job I had to do. So you have to, as Sam's point, find ways to try and break down organizational things, even if you know their patterns are slightly wrong.
I think that is a whole nother episode to talk about breaking those red tape, those mindsets of an organization, because we may be sitting there thinking, why are we doing this? This is wrong. We don't need to be signing off. We should be just providing information. But in that situation, there is no other way out other than giving the business what they want. You can argue until you're blue in the face, but does it actually help get the release out the door? It's a challenge.
Sometimes it comes down to who else. The process is going to be defined and someone's got to do it. Maybe you don't want the process. Maybe things shouldn't be that way. The barrier, the gate, the whatever system that you've got in your testing world. And sometimes it's better to be the devil who's doing it and the devil who isn't, so that you can actually then influence and try and educate the team and move them away from that model.
Sounds like a Brexit argument, Russell, that we...
Or it should be inside it rather than outside it.
You can only change if you're a part of it,
It's much easier to make change when you're inside.
Let's not get political.
But no, it's like as a kind of test and release, it enabled me to kind of refine the release process. The teams were passing the information in Git repository type thing and pull requests, and it was wonderful. But it was enabling them to kind of do that and not be an obstacle, which sometimes certain processes and gates are. And, I want to remove gates is the best way. I want to enable.
You've given a good example of where a manager's actually used their position to actually improve situations. So here's a hot take. We don't need test managers.
Hell yeah.
Test managers are dead.
it all comes down to what are they doing, right?
Yeah.
And do you need everything that maybe historically test managers did or testers? And it's like everything moves with the times. I personally prefer lead to test to manager, because in an agile world, you're managing less and leading more. But it's still people, still setting strategies, still collaborating with people. So a lot of the manager skill set is definitively there. Same way we need engineering managers and so on.
Yeah.
Just maybe the evolution of the role has changed a little bit versus the traditional a test manager has to approve everything type models.
Yeah, I think it's gone for me, and I think I wrote a blog about this a while ago. I think it's moved from that traditional testing activity coordination to leading a team of testers and coaching that team of testers and growing the team of testers to be able to go and do the good testing things. But there are still places where there's very traditional test managers that have test leads reporting to them, and they have testers reporting to them, and that deliver a waterfall-based product on a regular cadence. And it's not disparaging that they're still doing a good job in their context. They are still in a very traditional role, but the test management role, there is still opportunities to evolve that into more of a coaching, servant leadership type position rather than just managing the testing tasks.
Yeah, I think it's like everything, it evolves, doesn't it? That's the whole point.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say, is that the thing that I've noticed most recently is that one size does not fit all.
Amen to that.
Just because one company does one thing
Amen.
doesn't mean to say it's wrong, but they should be open to possible change and improvements. But actually, a test manager, it's based on the role that they do, not necessarily the title. Just because you work in a different way doesn't mean to say it's wrong.
Exactly that. And
it's a really strong point, because this has also happened with the choice of language. Like to Russell's point, a lot of what they've been doing is just a title. Like what they might be doing is different things. And I think we've seen this with language, where people have got hung up and had a barrier to entry because you use QA instead of test, or because you use checking instead of automate, like instead of testing, or all these sorts of things where, yes, there is a reason for that language to be used in certain contexts. But if the use of language is now a barrier to entry for us to progress going forwards, that in and of itself is a problem. And I think it can be incredibly harmful.
I think you're right, and I think that's a key thing. And when it comes to those misconceptions, I think the key thing there is, unless what you're releasing is of very low quality and there's loads of issues and whatever else, the 9 times out of 10, the process that you're following and the things that you're doing is working for you in your environment. Yes, there's always improvements, but it doesn't mean it's wrong. And despite what you might see on the external facing world, where, oh, if you're not doing this tool in automation, you're doing it wrong, or if you're not doing exploratory testing, you're doing it wrong. If it's working for you and you're delivering value, then you are doing it in a good way.
Have we not just then gone around in full circle and said there are no such things as myths? They're all true in some
Possibly.
It's all true
Possibly.
and untrue,
There we
listener,
go.
depending on
We've
your
not dispelled
context.
anything.
But I think talking about it at least helps to crystallize these things, and ultimately that's one of the key attributes for a tester, right?
Yeah, and I do think, to everyone's point here, look, there is different domains, different contexts. There's no such thing as best practice. We've hit some of these nails on the heads and things like that. And it is very hard for us to kind of come to an exact myth, because it does depend on where you are. There are more common things and less common things, but there's not necessarily a true and false. We live in a grey world, especially if you look outside your window in England. Most of the summer, I guarantee you it's pretty grey. And on that note, I think it's time to end when I remind us of our depressing British summers. So thank you for joining us as we talk about myths and we talk about kind of the misconceptions perhaps around some testing types, and where we concluded that actually it depends is ultimately the answer to everything. So if you'd like to give us feedback and perhaps give us your opinions, you're free to do so. You can reach us on Twitter. I think we've got a new place, Chris put in here.
We are indeed on Blue Sky.
Blue Sky, there you go. I can't remember that one. We're on Patreon, and we're on Instagram and some other places. And you can always email us at contactus@testingpeers.com. So thank you once again for joining us. Thank you, Saffron QA, for sponsoring us. And thank you to my fellow peers and to all you listeners.
For now, it's goodbye from the testing peers.
Goodbye.